Look at all that money, yeah, the money that they spend. Take another look now and take some time for him. I know cut trees for paper, cause it hurts the environment. Stop deforestation, yeah, it's time for him. Oh, an acre of hemp makes 20 barrels of oil. No need for pesticides to poison all our soil. People got no food, they got no clothes, they got no rent. Well, right now it's time for hemp.
Thank you for taking time for hemp. I'm your host, Casper Leach. On the program today, we are paying tribute to Peter McWilliams, author and medical cannabis activist. He was a man of conviction, to say the least, and his impact on the medical marijuana legalization movement is astounding. Peter McWilliams was not merely a writer, he was a visionary, a keen intellect, and he also focused on the freedom of personal expression. In the writings of Peter McWilliams, you find a passionate defense of personal freedom and a scathing critique of the criminalization of victimless crimes. In fact, that is a term that he coined. It's a term that means actions taken consensually without causing physical harm to others or to their property, whether it's drug use or sexual behavior or other forms of self-expression. McWilliams believed fervently in the right of individuals to make choices about their own bodies and lives free from government interference. At the heart of McWilliams' crusade for freedom was his profound understanding of the teachings of the various religious traditions. He saw in these teachings a common thread of compassion, tolerance, and respect for the dignity of every human being. But it was not merely in the realm of ideas that McWilliams made his mark. His actions spoke volumes, particularly in his advocacy for the medical use of cannabis. He was afflicted with AIDS, and McWilliams found himself facing a large number of health challenges. Chief among them was a violent nausea caused by the antiviral drugs used to treat his disease. In medical marijuana, he discovered a lifeline, a source of relief from the debilitating disease that threatened to overwhelm him. Recognizing the importance of sharing his experience with others, Peter McWilliams set out to publish a book on the subject, and he enlisted the help of Todd McCormick, a fellow activist and medical marijuana patient, to document their journey and to explore the potential benefits and different strains of cannabis. Little did Peter McWilliams know that this act of advocacy would land him in the crosshairs of the federal government and eventually cause him to be arrested. He had a remarkable life, to say the least, and his impact on the medical cannabis movement is profound. And today, we are paying tribute to this man with my guests Todd McCormick, Paul Krasner, Chris Conrad, Mickey Norris, and Paul Stanford. And we're going to start this tribute off with Paul Krasner. Paul, thank you for joining the program and taking time for hemp.
Oh, well, thank you.
So Paul Krasner, you had a major influence on Peter McWilliams. What was that like?
Well, he was, idealistic is the first word that comes to mind, and was a pioneer in medical marijuana movement. Ironically, he died ultimately because the authorities would not allow him to continue taking his medicine, which was marijuana. And he was a visionary, not just in the medical marijuana movement, but he and I were preparing to collaborate on a film about cyber war. Now all that he was predicting is taking place. And of course now there's cyber terrorism, and it's a reality. It's not science fiction anymore. And also, he had, personally a sense of humor. My wife Nancy and I would go to his house. He had this giant TV screen, and he just loved to laugh at, it was Jon Stewart's Daily Show then. Just loved to laugh. When people say somebody died too young, I think he would fit into that category. He had a lot more to contribute. So it's good that you're holding this memorial to him, or tribute, or celebration of his life.
And also somebody who was very much touched by Peter's work and life, and uses some of the inspiration of Peter's life as the essence and spirit of an organization that he put together called LEAP. Joining us on the program, Peter Criss. Peter, thank you for taking time for hemp.
Good to be here, and I could think of no better way to be here than talking about Peter McWilliams, because he's one of the once Einstein was asked how come he saw such things that he saw, and he said because he stood on the shoulders of giants, and one of the giants whose shoulders I stand on is Peter McWilliams. I met him in the late 1990s. I never met him personally, but in his book, Ain't Nobody's Business If You Do, he introduced me to a whole bunch of things. I mean, basically, it was one of those books that you read it, you say, you know, if I ever wrote a book, this is the book I'd write. It was so perfect on the issue of prohibition. He introduced me to a wonderful term that I use constantly now. Instead of victimless crime, I use consensual crime, which was a term I learned from him. He taught, I tell people that the work that I do, there's three people I thank for where I'm at today. One of them is a guy by the name of Thomas Saz. I don't know if you people know him, but he wrote a book back in the early 70s. He's a psychiatrist, or actually in the 60s, called The Myth of Mental Illness. And what he taught me in that book was that mental illness, much like beauty, is most often in the eye of the beholder, and not really anything wrong with the person. They're just different. And another person that I thank is Andrew Weil, who in Natural Mind taught me that drug use in our species was normal. Drug abuse and addiction a problem, but drug use was normal. And then I ran across Peter McWilliams, who taught me how to sell this stuff to Rotary clubs, because he put it together in such a concise, nice term, and as you said, with a sense of humor. I think you'll all get a kick out of this. It's nothing I stole from his book, but it's a concept I stole from him. I was up in Vermont a couple of years ago, and I was giving my presentation on why all drugs should be legalized and why we have to end prohibition. And I looked into my audience in Vermont, and I said, I'll tell you a crazy adult activity. Costs us lives every year. People are crippled every year doing this. I said, do you know there are human beings who, when they look at a high mountain, the first thing that comes to their mind is, I ought to climb up on top of that mountain and tie 2 slippery boards to my feet and then push myself off the edge? No, that's insane. Why would any sane person do something like that? We ought to ban that. Well, those Vermonters, the idea of banning skiing, which they make a nice living off of, didn't sound like such a good idea to them. And I said to them, again, what I learned from McWilliams, how to tell this to people. I then said to them, but if we ban it, what would happen? First off, the people that want to do it wouldn't stop doing it. But they wouldn't do it on groomed slopes anymore, where there was safety crews nearby, and probably more people would die and more people would be injured. So it's better off, even though it's crazy, to regulate and control it to make it as safe as possible. And that's from the beginning of Ain't Nobody's Business If You Do until the end. I tell every new speaker that comes to LEAP, if you want to read one book in your life that will help you do the work that we're doing here, read Peter McWilliams, because he took an issue that nobody even really talks about, the failure of this profound policy. And he tore it apart and gave it no place to live. And I thank him for that. I can't think of another author that I mention more often than I do Peter McWilliams. I just wish I had gotten to meet him. That's one of the sad parts of my life, is that our policy killed him before I ever had a chance to sit down and talk to the guy.
I think what gratified him was the fact that he had an influence on so many people who saw his qualities of, I guess it was summed up by his license plate on his car, which just said, enjoy. He was really a good example of the concept of individual freedom. He was the personification of that.
I tell people that my definition of liberty is the right to be as stupid as you want to be, as long as you don't hurt another person or another person's property. I think I probably got that concept, maybe not word for word, but that idea from him, because that's what he said. People have a right to make mistakes in their own personal lives. They have a right to do that. That's what liberty means to people, you know. And it isn't, liberty isn't doing what other people tell you to do. It's doing what you want. And in fact, all the great inventions we got from people is because they stepped outside the boundaries of common behavior and stuff like that to find new ideas. That's what I got from him. Like I said, I'm at a little bit disadvantaged because I didn't know him personally, and I really wish I would have. But all I know about him, I took from that one book, and like I said, it's almost the Bible for LEAP, because if you know anything about LEAP, you know that we only have one position at LEAP, and that is that prohibition's a bad idea. We don't have any plan at LEAP for a regulatory system or anything like that. We just say we have to end the prohibition. And that's basically what he taught me in that.
And, you know, he would have been thrilled at the idea that there was an organization based on law enforcement people who wanted to end prohibition, you know, and there are more and more police who realize that they have better things to do than bust people for smoking a flower.
Well, it's interesting because, again, he didn't just deal with the marijuana thing. He dealt with the whole prohibition thing. You know, he talked about prostitution. He talked about, obviously, alcohol prohibition, the failure of that, and about these consensual adult activities. And that's the thing I think that we have to get people to understand, is that when you have activity, when you ban things that people don't want to do with each other, like people don't want to be robbed, people don't want to be murdered, people don't want to be assaulted, when you ban those activities, you get a lot of support from the public in helping you enforce that ban. People report it to you when people steal from you and when people assault you and stuff like that. But when you ban consensual adult activities between consenting adults that they want to do together, like whatever, have sex, gamble, buy and use and sell drugs, whatever. First off, you create crime where there is no crime. That's what he said in that book, because you make something that nobody was complaining about. I mean, maybe the people that weren't doing it were complaining, but the people that were doing it weren't complaining. And you make that illegal, so you turn them into criminals. And if there's a monetary profit to be made in it, you also create violence in your society because you create an underground marketplace. And that's what to me, ain't nobody's business if you do so clearly explain and showed you step by step how these things transpire and how all through history this has been a failed policy. And it's not, again, it's not about, I tell people all the time, we at LEAP are not about the drugs. If you want our position at LEAP, all the drugs are bad, don't do any of them, they're all terrible. We're about is the policy that we use to deal with these drugs.
Sure. Yeah, and essentially, you know, the world is filled with control freaks. Peter's philosophy was, you know, it's like the American Civil Liberties Union. Their metaphor was always, you know, you can swing your fist as long as you want, as long as it doesn't touch anybody else's nose. And it's a nice visual analogy of what he stood for.
Was he more of a reluctant activist, or was he the type of person to go looking for a cause?
He wasn't so much looking for a cause. He just, you know, whatever crossed his perception that fell in that category, he would respond to. And it transcended, you know, Peter was progressive, but one of his admirers was the conservative William Buckley, who, even though he was conservative, he was like Barry Goldwater in the sense that whether it was reproductive rights, the right to smoke marijuana, these were issues that transcended, you know, liberal versus conservative. And that, I think that was one of his tributes, that he could get past, and he would influence people to get past their own kind of brainwashed agendas.
It's funny because when I first met Peter Criss, he said almost the same thing, and he said that was because of somebody that he had read about who had done this book that he was kind of inspired by. And I went, what was that? He goes, well, there was this guy named Peter McWilliams who wrote a book that caused me to put together LEAP in such a way that instead of making it just focus on marijuana, we needed to incorporate all the drugs and the whole prohibition on this whole mess. And that's what got me thinking in that direction. I thought, wow, isn't that right, Peter?
Yes, that's absolutely true. In fact, we talked about control freaks. So somebody mentioned that term a few minutes ago. I describe it this way. And before I say this, let me say that a good friend of mine always said there's only two kinds of people in the world, the kind of people that think there's only two kinds of people in the world, and the kind of people that are smarter than that, okay? So you'll bear with me. Bear with me for a second. I divide the world into two kinds of people, okay? There are the normal people, and how you tell a normal person is if a normal person has a great new idea, what the normal person does is they actualize it, and if other people admire it, they share it with them. Now, I'm a capitalist, so they may share it for a profit, okay? But they share it with those that admire it. And then you have the other group of people, and I call them the fascists. And how you tell if you're dealing with a fascist is if they have a great new idea, the next thought that comes into their head is, this is such a good idea, we ought to make everybody do it this way. And I think Peter McWilliams understood that very clearly, and the people that he spoke out about were the fascists in our world. And you could be a fascist anything. You could be a fascist Republican, Democrat, Libertarian. As long as you think you have a right to force your ideas on other people, you fall into that category of my definition. And that's again what he so clearly said. I never read any of his other books. I have a very single-minded purpose. I'm involved in this issue because I feel very strongly about it.
Well, any writer would be gratified by knowing that their work actually influenced people. In one of my books, Hot Stories for the Soul, the dedication was, this book is dedicated to Peter McWilliams, whose creative and compassionate leadership in the medical marijuana movement has continued to be inspiring and invigorating. That's also gratifying to know that even after you die, your work can still influence and inspire people.
This has been a pleasure. I really got something else I got to do, so I got to go.
Well, thank you, Peter.
But I want to thank you all, and I'll tell you right now, Peter McWilliams deserves all the credit in the world for everything he did, particularly for this movement and for LEAP. I may have been able to explain LEAP in my own words, but handing a book to somebody and letting it say it, here it is right here, made it a lot easier. So I want to thank you. It was a pleasure spending some time with y'all, and thank you for the time you've given me, and thanks for sharing your audience with me both on Wednesdays and today.
All right, bye-bye. Well, I want to make comment at this point that we are being joined by someone who has been influenced by Peter McWilliams, and I wanted to make it a point to be on the program today to share that with his family and friends. And he's a good friend of mine, and I'm blessed to be living in the same community as him because of the work that he has done. He has made an amazing impact on so many lives as well. And his name is Paul Stanford. Paul, thank you for taking time for him.
Well, thank you, Casper. I appreciate that. I've been a long-time admirer of Paul Krasner's and had a chance to meet him a few times, but I never got a chance to meet Peter McWilliams personally, in person, but I exchanged emails with him frequently, and I was shocked when he was arrested writing a book with Todd McCormick, and I was shocked in the way that they treated him and made him go through the whole prison system and made him face 5 years in prison, and they wouldn't let him use medical marijuana. And then when he died, I was outraged. I was very much outraged. That my understanding is he died in a bout of nausea in his bathroom. And I was so outraged, I called the judge in that federal case several times. I was just outraged, and I still am outraged about the horrible end they faced, that he faced there. And he was a real inspiration to millions in his writings, and his speech at the Libertarian National Convention was very inspirational as well. So,
can I just read a little excerpt from a thing I wrote called Who Killed Peter McWilliams?
Please.
I accused President Bill Clinton for coming out against medical marijuana, as if to say, I feel your pain, I just don't want to help you relieve it. I accused drug czar Barry McCaffrey, who proclaimed after medical marijuana initiatives were passed in Arizona and California, he said, quote, there is not a shred of scientific evidence that shows that smoked marijuana is useful or needed. I accused California Governor Gray Davis for opposing recommendations by his own Attorney General's task force on medical marijuana. I accuse Assistant U.S. Attorneys Jackie Chulijan and Mary Oljanidi, the pair of prosecutors who sought to prevent the use of a medical marijuana defense. I accuse Federal Judge George King, who denied Peter McWilliams, slumping in his wheelchair in the courtroom, not only the right to a medical marijuana defense, but also his legal right to smoke medical marijuana. These individuals participated in an unspoken conspiracy, all for the same reason. And what was it they had in common? They all wanted to keep their jobs. They all wanted to advance in their careers. They all wanted prestige. They all wanted to live in a nice house. They all wanted to send their kids to college. They all wanted to be responsible to their families. And the price was simply their own humanity.
Those amazing, hardworking people at the West Coast Leaf are joining us now. We are talking about Chris Conrad and Mickey North, who are on the program with Mickey and Chris. Thank you for joining us and paying tribute to Peter McWilliams.
Hi, Casper. Thanks for inviting us on the show to talk about Peter.
Yeah, great to be here.
It's a tragedy that we still are reeling from, actually, the fact that we believe that Peter was basically killed by the U.S. government, in our perception that he didn't have to die when he did, but that our government policies with the war on drugs and the way that we treat defendants and with the requirements that they put on people to comply in order to stay out of jail is what led to Peter's death prematurely. The fact that he had AIDS and couldn't take his medicine as a requirement of not being out on bail, facing his charges where they put on him, and the fact that the United States doesn't even allow medical marijuana defense, all those factors led to Peter's premature death. He didn't have to die when he did, and we hold this government responsible for that. And I think people need to know how the drug war is operating and what it does to people. And so, unfortunately, Peter was one of those who was victimized by our policies, and for that, we have to keep fighting and end this war on drugs and end the way that we deny people medical marijuana at the federal level. I mean, it's all of that is interconnected with what we're dealing with here.
Yeah, Peter was like a totally amazing guy. When we met him in the early 90s, he was, I guess at the mid-90s.
Yeah, it was mid-90s.
After 96, yeah, that's right. We hadn't met him before. But he had come from a background of where he had gone through a period of, great trouble and tribulation and depression in his own life, and had come back to write a series of books giving people encouragement about how to make their lives better. And he had lived his own advice. So he had become really a strong, powerful figure, like a beacon of light amongst his friends, bringing people together, sharing ideas, sharing positivity and optimism. So, being stricken with cancer, with AIDS, and finding that medical marijuana was such a wonderful part of his treatment, the only wonderful part of his treatment, as it were, that made it tolerable, put him in the position where, as someone who had previously started from a bad place and reached out to help other people, he again was reaching from the dark place of being having AIDS to help people out as well. And when it came to this issue around the drug war, and he had found that medical marijuana was something that worked for him and for other people, he did the totally courageous thing, not only by speaking publicly about it, but by running as a libertarian candidate for office, telling people that the government was wrong to be doing this to people's lives and so forth, and then ultimately trying to help the people who didn't have access to medical marijuana because of the federal government. And ultimately, that's what brought him down. What's amazing about it is that the federal government says marijuana doesn't have any accepted or proven medical use, and yet I would say that Peter McWilliams proves it, because he warned them that if he didn't have access to the medical marijuana, it would kill him. He said that was what was keeping him alive, and they took it from him. A judge in Los Angeles took it into his own bloody hands, the power to say, you cannot use it anyway, And it led directly to the death of Peter McWilliams because of that. And he had told him that was going to happen. And so to me, there's blood on the hands of everybody in the DEA, every federal judge who's doing this to people. You know, Peter McWilliams is like, again, he's a beacon to show how wrong they are to do what they're doing. And I hope that judge feels the guilt and the shame he deserves to feel. I hope every DEA agent sees what a horrible thing that they have done and can understand how purely evil they are by taking medical marijuana away from people like Peter McWilliams. And yet to this very day, just this past month, again, we had the federal government say marijuana has no accepted medical value. So it shows, just as goes to show, it barely even matters who's president in terms of this. The machine itself, the evil machine that grinds people's lives up and takes their property. I mean, one of the things that struck Peter was when he was in a point where he could fight back the most, they took everything he had, and he had to get his mother to put up her home to keep him out of prison as a bond. And he knew that if he used medical marijuana, they would take his mother's home. That's how low these scum are, you know. And I have these guys in power in the United States, and Peter McWilliams moldering in a grave right now. It makes me, you know, it repels me, frankly. And except it doesn't just repel me, it also creates so much anger in me and creates such a need to do something that it continually inspires me to this day when I think, well, you know, these pot smokers who voted against legalization last year, or the pot growers and so forth, you know, that those guys, you know, maybe they deserve what they're getting, but people like Peter McWilliams do not deserve what they're getting. And people, mothers and fathers, and people all over the country who are using medical marijuana, who have no other choices, they don't deserve to be put in this grindhouse of the drug war. And so I think that anybody who's making money off of selling marijuana and then keeping it illegal, you know, Peter McWilliams is on your conscience too right now, my friend, whoever you may be. And it's time to turn around and start doing the right thing. And we have to pull together to make sure there are not more Peter McWilliams out there, not more Rainbow Farms out there, not more these tragedies that the government is willing to heap in piles all around us in order to keep the perpetual power of the drug war industrial complex, its authority to take lives, take property, to put people in prison, grind away their lives, take away the wealth and the future of this country. That's the thing that Peter McWilliams stood against, and I still stand with him on that.
Now, I understand that you and Mickey were with him when the police came to get him on one occasion.
Actually, we weren't with him. He had invited us to, or opened his home up to us to stay in his guest home, which was an apartment above his garage there. And we were there visiting and had spent a little time with him. And then the next morning when we woke up, you know, everybody was looking for Peter, and they came in very quietly, actually.
They being the police.
They being the police and, you know, the DEA who took him away. And our truck at the time, we had a truck, was parked in there in his carport, and it made us a little nervous, you know, to be there. But we didn't know, you know, we had no clue until his housekeeper had come out looking for him. Where's Peter? Where's Peter? And then a couple hours later, we found out that he had been picked up.
Yeah, so we were with him in a way, and we were at his house, and he was giving us some advice about marketing our book, Hemp Lifeline to the Future. And Hemp
well, actually, he was really interested in Shattered Lives Portraits from America's Drug War. That's when we really got to know him. But he was a publisher, so he knew the industry.
That leads me to my next question for for all of, three of you, for sure, four of you. Paul Stanford, Mickey, and Chris, and Paul Krasner, since you knew him so well, please, each of you, respond to this. There comes a time when, after being told you're facing a death sentence with AIDS, and you're behind bars, or you're facing behind bars, depending on what point in Peter's life you're at, and the things that you're looking at are just horrific, coming down on you, crashing on your shoulders, all around you. And somewhere within his soul and his spirit, he found the wherewithal to stand up and spit back in the eye of those who were tromping on him. Not just fight back, but I mean with a little sarcastic bite. Where did he find that? Where did he find that strength? We'll start with Paul Krasner first, and then we'll let the others three respond to that, please, because that's an amazing part of his character, I do believe, that people need to learn from.
Well, I think one of the things was his sense of humor, not just about the world around him, but self-deprecating humor. After he died, I wrote this piece where I talked about that he choked on his own vomit, and I got an email from Ken Kesey saying, well, at least that's better than choking on somebody else's vomit. And my first instinct was to send that to Peter if he had been alive, because he would have loved that kind of dark humor. And I think that his sense of humor was one of the things that enabled him to, fight against the machine.
And if I would pop in, I would have to say it was the whole love thing. He had this love for others, and he had a deep well of love within himself that he learned to bring to the front during his own period of depression. Was he had to love himself and he had to love other people, and so he let that love be the guide. When you love people enough, then you can't stand by and let them be hurt, and so I think that's where he drew a lot of his strength.
We didn't really get a chance, unfortunately, to know Peter that well. We were just starting to get to know him when he was arrested. But my impression is that he was a very bright man. He is very intelligent. He had a lot going on, a lot of savvy with the industry, with the industry, I mean business. And he had a lot of courage. And the courage is what propels people, or the feeling of you just have to do something. You have to do, when you know something, you have to do something about it. And that's a very human thing. And I think, he had that in spades. He wanted to help patients. His goal that led in the first place was to bring down, to make medical marijuana accessible to people, to bring down the price so it's affordable for people. And I think it was a humanitarian, reason, behind a lot of what he was doing. And I think he believed in it. So, when you have all those things together, I think it leads to taking actions, and fighting the system.
Paul Stanford here. I just want to say that, Peter knew that the pen is mightier than the sword. And he had gone from being, a lot of people self-publish their books, but hardly anyone gets it to be number one on the New York Times, bestseller list. And so Peter took his remarkable success and his need for medical marijuana to treat his condition and jumped right into this movement with his book, Ain't Nobody's Fault If You Do, or that was...
Ain't Nobody's Business If You Do.
Yeah, Ain't Nobody's Business, excuse me. That was another bestseller that became a political manifesto for libertarians. And he took that and started to focus on marijuana and medical marijuana, which led to his contact with Chris Conrad and Mickey Norris, and also with Todd McCormick. Todd McCormick had this cannabis castle, and so he started working with Todd McCormick to bring out a book. And so the federal government realized that Peter, through his publishing, through his recognition as a best-selling author, was going to chip away at their drug war. He wasn't really an active part of this conspiracy, and instead they focused on him as a publisher and made him part of this conspiracy with Todd McCormick. And Todd ultimately did 5 years in a mandatory minimum sentence in federal prison. And he scared the bejeebus out of the drug war industrial complex. And that's why they got him. That's why Judge King sentenced him to death by not allowing him to use medical marijuana, even though he told the judge that. And it makes me angry, too. Anytime I think about it, it just makes me angry. And I can share that with anybody else out there who's got a shred of humanity.
And in fact, I think it was, this is Chris Conrad again, that, the whole idea that we were meeting with him about how to take the story of drug war prisoners to a higher national level in conjunction with what Paul was just saying there. This guy had a track record. And we had a book that was like shocking the conscience of America. And he was the person who could have put it on the bestsellers list, you know. And so it's kind of interesting timing that that's the, you know, right while this is going on is, you know, I'm not saying that that was the big motive.
Well, Peter was definitely influential. And so, you know, we're trying to keep his memory alive and his inspiration to others alive. So, but anyway, thank you for doing the show, and thanks for having us on it. And
I want to
carry on
thank you.
to everybody else who's on listening, and to the other guests on the show. It's nice hearing your voices.
Yeah, me here too. And please carry the light of Peter McWilliams forward. The world's a little darker without him, but his light still burns in all of us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Well, we're going to be joined here in a few moments by somebody who was very active in Peter's life, especially towards the last walk of his path and journey. I'm talking about Todd McCormick. In the meantime, Paul Krasner, you mentioned it was like a magical house, a castle of pot is what Todd McCormick had. Is that right?
It was called that. I'll tell one quick little story about Todd. You know, in one of my books, Magic Mushrooms and Other Highs, From Toad Slime to Ecstasy, Todd had contributed one or two pieces to that anthology. And so I sent him a copy while he was in prison. But the warden rejected it, sent it back, and here's the quote. Because on pages 259 to 261, it described the process of squeezing toads to obtain illicit substances which could be detrimental to the security, good order, and discipline of the institution, unquote. This was pure theater of cruelty. Federal correctional facilities do not have a toad problem, and outside accomplices have not been catapulting loads of toads over barbed wire fences to provide the fuel for a prison riot. One side effect of how the minds work to justify the cruel things that they do. So I'm glad you're having Todd on the show. He was.
As a matter of fact, Todd has just joined us. Todd McCormick is on the program with Paul Stanford and Paul Krasner. And Todd, it is very kind of you to take time for him.
Well, thank you for having me, Casper. Thanks for spending some time on such a magnificent life today.
Yes, I understand that you shared a love like brothers, like family, a camaraderie that people find when they're in the Army, serving in a war shoulder to shoulder in the same foxhole, fighting for the same cause, going against the same enemy, and walking the same path and the same step. And I understand that the impact that he had on your life and you had on his is just one that can only be found in brotherhood and friendship.
Well, thank you, Casper. That's a really wonderful way to put it. You know, I think a lot of times that, you know, we find each other in life, and sometimes life puts us together and forces us to be compatible and to cooperate with one another and to work with one another towards a common goal. And, you know, life kind of did that with me and Peter. For myself, I discovered Peter's work when my mother sent me one of his books called Do It, Let's Get Off Our Butts. And I was highly motivated to move to the West Coast, and I kind of read this book and followed my dream, as the book so inspires. And when I got here, I actually thought about trying to get a hold of him and thank him for the profound effect he had in my life. And I was shy. And years later, I was working with Jack Herrer, and Jack handed me this 600-page hardcover book of Ain't Nobody's Business If You Do, and said, the author borrowed a lot from the emperor. I want you to read it all and tell me what he did. And so I read the whole book, and at the time I was starting to work as an editor on Jack's book, The Emperor Wears No Clothes, and Peter took great passages from the book and really emphasized Jack's points, and, you know, I came back with a glowing book review of Peter's work. And then years later, sadly, and in March of 95, or 96, I'm not sure which year it was because I was in Europe at the time, but Peter was diagnosed with both cancer and AIDS simultaneously. And his life took a very sharp turn, and he started passionately focusing on studying medical marijuana. Now, Peter would best be described as a polymath. He was an expert in almost any subject that fascinated him. Peter started with love, as we all do in his teens, and wrote a wonderful poetry book called Come Love With Me and Be My Life. Went on to sell over 3.5 million copies of this book. And one of my favorite poems from that book was one very short poem. And Peter wrote, "If you love me, tell me so. If you tell me, love me so." And I really think that described Peter. He had such great passion, and what he loved dearly. And, you know, he says when the Beatles broke up, basically that's when he got into transcendental meditation, and he wrote the book TM. He told me years later that if he were to rewrite it, he would just turn around the 2 letters and write MT because there was nothing there. He later went on and wrote the personal computing book, and he wasn't so much fascinated with computers as much as he was fascinated with how they could help us and how they could help us educate and learn and teach one another. And William F. Buckley, who I urge anyone listening to really go and search for William F. Buckley's obituary on his dear friend Peter, because he credited Peter with moving him from typewriters into the computing age, and the two became best friends, as crazy as a twist of life could be, you know, a gay libertarian, so to speak, and a staunch conservative. And when they talked on the phone, they were really like two brothers, you know, laughing and jesting, and it was really amazing the dynamic relationships that Peter acquired through his incredibly creative career. In his probably 30 years of writing, he had offered over 35 books, 5 of which became New York Times bestsellers on 5 different subjects.
Wow.
That's why I describe him as a polymath, because very few people ever become a New York Times bestseller, never mind a bestseller 5 different times on 5 different points. And ironically, his book, Ain't Nobody's Business If You Do, was not one of his bestsellers. It sold over 600,000 copies in its first 2 years of print, but compared to his other successes, like over 3.5 million copies and over 1 million copies sold of Do It, Peter felt like Ain't Nobody's Business was a little heavy for some people to be able to take.
Okay.
And, you know, one of the funniest parts in that book is he writes 6 chapters in search of a shorter book. And his points are so well executed. And, you know, I know a lot of people I've been online talking about Peter as a spiritualist and such. Peter was an atheist. Peter was a very realistic person that was raised Roman Catholic, but, you know, he was a man who evolved constantly. Peter was a rabid researcher. He was incredible at learning, and his evolution of thinking was profound. I mean, he fell in love with this gentleman, John Rogers, through the 80s, and basically credited the man with co-writing his whole Life 101 series of books, giving him money, giving him credit, giving him time on Oprah Winfrey. I mean, before there was an Oprah Winfrey Book of the Month Club, Peter was already an Oprah Winfrey darling. He was already knocking out books that was blowing her and her audience away before she even thought of starting a book club. And Peter was inspiring from, I believe, the second he put a pen on paper. And, you know, he ended up basically what he felt was getting rid of his depression. He started taking antidepressants or SSRIs, and he woke up one day and thought, what am I doing searching for a God? You know, why do I think heaven is far away? You know, heaven is now. You know, passion is my God. You know, I have to follow what I love and be real with who I love. And, you know, and that's really, if anything, love was his religion. You know, Peter had his own obstacles in the world dealing with manic depression and different things, but I don't think I've ever met a more passionate person than Peter.
Well, I think if Peter were here, unless I'm mistaken, he would say this: for immediate release, July 30th, 1997, from Peter McWilliams, who is Todd McCormick. The name Todd McCormick will almost certainly cross your Newsweek today. The first medical marijuana arrest in California since the passage of Proposition 215. You may be wondering what sort of person he is: an opportunist drug dealer or a compassionate patient. Here's my take on Todd. Todd and I met 10 months ago.
Stop you for a second.
Researching his book and on medical marijuana, AIDS, cancer, and research. Todd and I had become close friends, and I probably know him better than anyone else in the press. I want you to know the real Todd McCormick on a very different level. Carefully orchestrated bust and the spin on the government he has been researching for weeks is sure to take. Now, there's quite a long, lengthy statement there from him.
Yeah, there is, Cal.
Appreciation for you, and I thought I wanted to let you know that I'm aware of that, and our audience needs to be aware of that, so that they understand your path and your friendship and your understanding of Peter's spirit.
Well, I was, fortunate enough to spend a few very formidable years around Peter. Peter was my first book publisher. I'm the only person that Peter published other than himself in his whole career. I once joked that I asked him to sign my book, Do It For Me, because he asked me what brought me to California. I said, well, I picked up this book called Do It. Let's get off our butts. And he laughed, and he said, my book? I said, yeah. I said, I still have it. I said, I'd love to have you sign it for me. He said, no, I'll never sign your book. I'll just sign your paychecks. He said, it's a much greater compliment. And I thought it was hilarious. But Peter taught me so very much. He was one of my life's greatest teachers. And it was amazing how our world came together. I really urge people that are listening to go online. And when I went to prison and sadly Peter died, the people at Media Awareness Project did a really wonderful thing, and they mirrored Peter's websites. And if you just go online and you go look up the Map Inc. mirror for Peter McWilliams, you can read all of his works. Peter believed that all of his intellectual property should be shared, and that if people went online and read enough of it that they actually liked it, they could go purchase his books. And considering how many books he sold, I think he was correct about sharing intellectual property. And he felt like what he was doing was so important to the world and so inspiring to the world that he didn't want to just hold it back so that people couldn't access that information. And, in its passing, I think it's really sad that has been taken off of his website, because during his entire life, all his works were online on his website, and really wonderfully, the people at Map Inc. have preserved the website when it was still run by Peter before he passed away, and all of his works are still there. And there's probably not a more inspiring corner on the internet to find and get lost in than the work of Peter. Another piece that I really, really recommend is people look up. It was called A Question of Compassion, and it was one of the last pieces of work that Peter was working on when he passed away, and it was a collection of images. Peter was a photographer. He did mostly portrait photography of his boyfriends and people he found interesting. And that book is still available on Amazon. And I kind of disagree when I heard people talking about Peter being mad that his books are being traded for such a tall amount. I think Peter would be greatly honored that his out-of-print works were in such high demand that people were willing to trade them for such a premium price, considering the fact that he has given all of that information away on the internet for as long as it was in print. I mean, Peter was working on, when he died, like I said, it's called A Question of Compassion, and it ended up being released as a partial PDF because he didn't feel like he was going to finish it, and sadly he did not. And it is still available online. You can just search for it and find it. But Peter was heading in a direction where he was really trying to teach people and educate people about what was happening with medical marijuana. And it was, really wrong for the federal government to go after him and prosecute him as a drug dealer when it was so clearly evident that he had never made a dollar off selling a joint in his life. They charged him with that because basically they used the argument that because he gave me an advance and he knew I would grow pot, because I'm such a known pot grower, that then he was culpable for what I used my money to do. And
it was clear if that had gone to trial, I don't think they could have got a conviction on Peter McWilliams. But they killed him in the process, so he wouldn't come to trial.
Politely, I would hate to disagree, but what a lot of people don't realize is that it was a lot deeper than that. Peter was trying to move forward and do things that he thought were legal at the time. It came evident in 2003 sentencing of the people that were running the Los Angeles Cannabis Buyers Club that they initially turned in me and with it Peter McWilliams because they were afraid Peter was going to be competition. And if people actually really researched the case, they would see this in the discovery. But, you know, how many people really look that far? And, you know, the way the government railroaded not just us starting off, but people like Brian Epis and others on and on, you know, the government cheats, and anybody that thinks they're going to go into a courtroom and get a fair court trial is just sadly mistaken. They wouldn't allow me to say the term medical marijuana. I couldn't use those two words together or I'd be held in contempt of court, and my lawyers too.
Is it also that he could not say that he was terminally ill? He could not say that? Is that true?
Oh, how about this? And I can speak to my own first person. They wouldn't let me bring my 5 different doctors in to testify to my health. They wouldn't let me talk about the fact that I was legal. They wouldn't let me talk about the fact that I had sought a lawyer's advice, and I had what's called advice of counsel. So did Peter, before we ever engaged in anything that the government perceived to be illegal. We had no intentions on doing anything illegal, and they knew that. And in order to come and say, well, we're going to basically prosecute you for intent, they've got to say, well, you can't present the fact that you had no intention of breaking the law. And see, this is where the gray area is. Every day of the week, you can't go into a bank and rob a bank, okay? There's no it's okay to rob a bank day. But in effect, the voters of California passed medical marijuana, and we have this thing called a democracy, and us fools that go and vote think that it means something, and Peter thought it meant something. So when the law changed, like many a businessman, he looked at this and saw opportunity. And people should see that now. I mean, Peter's somebody that thought his little romantic poetry to his boyfriend in the 60s was worthy of being put in a book, and he was right. 3.5 million copies later, a whole bunch of people agreed with him. So business, in a sense, can be a powerful thing if used in a way for good. And Peter had a real strong bend towards using the power that we have in our energy positively. Being a conscious capitalist, in a sense, is what Peter very much was. He put his money where his heart and his mind were. And that was what I think, honestly, we need more of. You know, we need more people that were really like the real Peter, and not the imaginary Peter that a lot of people are sitting here embellishing over that have never even met him, but the Peter that changed with information, that applied knowledge in his life, that sought out all the facts and then made really valued judgments, and then stopped for a minute and shared all that great information with the people around him about every single subject that he stopped at in life.
Paul Krasner, you've been pretty quiet. I'm sure you'd like to say something to Todd McCormick. I have a question or two.
Well, I'd like to know what Todd is up to today, these days.
Well, I would like to say hello. You know, everybody that's listening, I've had the great fortune of meeting Paul Krasner through the wonderful people at High Times, and then also meeting him through Peter, and our lives have kind of come together more than once. And I owe you a phone call, and I'll give you a call after the show. And I'm really thrilled that Casper got through to you, that you were there, because, you know, you were a huge inspiration to Peter through The Realist and everything you did. And I know that you and Peter had been corresponding for quite a while. I remember the three of us getting high in his living room. And it's nice to hear your voice, Paul. It really is great. And, you know, we lost a dear.
So that's what you're up to these days, is hearing my voice, huh? What else are you up to?
Well, technically, you know, I'm trying to follow Peter's footsteps. I'm working on Grow Medicine, which is going to be a follow-up to my book, How to Grow Medical Marijuana. I'm going to start doing lecture tours, which is honestly exactly what Peter and I were working on back in 1997. He wanted me to finish my How to Grow Medical Marijuana book, and then he was going to put me out on an author tour to go teach people how to grow pot and instigate change everywhere we could. And now I'm back on track and really kind of heading down that path. After the Grow Medicine book, my next book that I also sold is called Reefer Gladness, Confessions of a Cancer Patient. And that's a lot of fun. And I'm also now the editor, in Jack's passing, really sadly, The Emperor Wears No Clothes. And now we're going to take that book digital. We're going to turn it into a really good iPad, Kindle-type apps, so that we could try to disseminate it to even more people. And, Yeah, for those listening, I mean, between Peter McWilliams and Jack Herer, I was in a very fortunate position, where I've had some really great teachers and inspirations in my life that were very close to me, and in an odd way, now that they've both passed, it's kind of strange that I do carry a bit of their work with me. Look, I mean, really in Jack's footsteps and Peter's too, it's all about disseminating the information, and we've always believed, I can surely speak for Peter and Jack on this, that we all believe that education would set us free. And, we've all been teaching this as diligent as we can to anyone that'll listen for as long as we've known it. And that's the one thing I urge everybody to do, is to go and find the information and let it change them, let it empower them and make them passionate about this, and go out and, start hemp fests and to write books and to do what they can, talk to their politicians, start with the teachers of their children, and actually spread this information so it's so infectious that the truth takes over, and that, we are liberated, because this is really, prohibition is truly a stranglehold on all of humanity, and we have to overcome it.
Well, I got to admit that when I first started working in Jack Herer's office in 1990, I thought that little book of his would do what everybody here is talking about. I thought we're an educated society, 36 months, max 48 months, the 100 monkey thing we'd set in, and within a decade we'd all be having hemp fuel and hemp paper and hemp fibers and jobs, and then all the people out of jail, and we'd be paying taxes and all the... Anyway, don't want to go there. Paul,
can I stop you though for a minute, Casper? Look at the change we've experienced. When I first went to Amsterdam, in 1994 with Jack, and I was with him when they named the sea Jack Herer after him and everything, I thought that we were so far away from where Amsterdam was then. And now here we are. We are so far ahead of where Europe and Amsterdam has ever been. We have legality here. We have taxation and representation happening in the city of Oakland and Berkeley and other places. And, they only had decriminalization and toleration, and we're actually getting what's called equal rights. So I think we're making the advancements, and, I don't want to sound like a pessimist, because the one thing both these men left me was a real sense of optimism that if we work hard and we work diligently, that we can make big changes, and I hope everybody listening really tunes into that as a message, because, there should be a celebration of life, Peter was a big fan of Dr. Seuss, and the old "don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened" was one of the funniest things he ever told me. And I have always remembered that quote and him telling me about that. And I really think that we have to focus on the positive, and we have to really, life is short. And, he and I were joking about writing a Death 101 book. Because truthfully, there has to be a passion for life, because, and this is something like a warrior spirit, if I would say, and the connotation of that is more what Peter was, because, he didn't fear death. He looked at it like a realistic end to a beautiful existence. Like, you don't have a beautiful day without a beautiful sunset. And he was such a realist about this. And when people focus on death, and they focus on the fact that I don't have forever to tell me, to tell people I love them. I don't have forever to keep myself in good health. I don't, have forever to, to honor the things and people that I appreciate. Then they start doing it. And, that was something nice about Peter, because when he got sick, he became very passionate about the people he loved, because we all get caught up working the extra hours and thinking about the Lexus. And by the way, his license plate, Paul, was consent on his Lexus. And I actually joked once, I said, "Is that a pickup line?" And Peter was such a beautiful spirit, and anyone that knew him...
Everybody have a chance to say their piece on Peter, and give a shout-out to those they wish. We'll start with Paul Krasner, move to Paul Stanford, then to Todd McCormick. I'll wrap up the show. Paul Krasner?
Well, I think that the legacy of Peter comes from his being proactive, and Todd is a good example of being proactive instead of just sitting around and complaining about the way things are. And that's a legacy that is an excellent one, because it means that even though he's gone, his influence and his inspiration and his proactivity continues with others. And again, as Bob Dylan once said, you know, what better thing can you do than to inspire people? And that's his legacy.
Thank you so very much. Paul Stanford?
Well, I'd like to stand in solidarity with Paul Krasner there. Peter McWilliams is an inspiration in so many different ways. His best-selling books live on for generations, and his work continues to inspire us all. What the government did to him and to Todd continues to anger and motivate activists, as does his positive vision of love, and just thank him for that and honor Peter McWilliams.
Todd McCormick?
Casper, thanks for taking the time to do this show and taking the time to focus on such a great guy. Peter was so much to so many, and, you know, a lot of people go through life and they touch lives. I think Peter was able to penetrate, you know, the hearts and minds of just millions of people. And, you know, thank you for taking a minute to honor him. And for everybody else on the line, thank you for taking a minute to share your thoughts on Peter. And, you know, knowing Peter the way I did, he would do nothing but appreciate all the kindness. And, you know, he would say, you know, don't mourn, organize. And thank you very much for spending some time on Peter today.
I also want to say thank you so much to Peter Criss for taking time out of his day to join us on this program. Hardworking activist who has also been an inspiration to me. And my love goes to Chris Conrad and Mickey Norris, and I want to say thank you to them. We send our love to all of you out there who make your friends aware of our broadcast, and for taking it very seriously when I say the next time you hear me, you'll know that it's time for him.
Yeah, the money that they